You're not even half the woman my mother is. My daughter-in-law said at dinner. I pushed my chair back and replied, then she can start paying your rent. My son froze in shock. Rent? What rent, Mom? Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The first thing that always struck me about my son's apartment was the silence. It was an expensive silence, the kind you only find 22 floors up in a glass tower in uptown Charlotte, where the noise of the city is a distant differential hum. My house, a comfortable sprawling brick home in Myers Park, had the sounds of a life lived, the groan of old floorboards, the rustle of magnolia leaves against a window pane. This place had the sterile hush of a modern art gallery. It was beautiful, I supposed, in a cold architectural way, but it wasn't a home. It was a showroom. I sat on a low, white sofa that was more of a sculpture than a piece of furniture, a cup of tea I hadn't asked for on the marble coaster beside me. My daughter-in-law, Jessica, glided around the open-plan living space, pointing out her latest acquisitions. The rug is a vintage Persian, of course, she said, her voice a low, melodious hum. It took my decorator months to source one with the right color story, and the painting, she gestured to a massive chaotic canvas of angry blue and black slashes, is an original by Jean-Michel Basquiat's contemporary, utterly brilliant. Don't you think? It's very impactful, dear, I said, my voice carefully neutral. Brenda Hayes had spent 30 years building the Gilded Palate, the most successful and exclusive catering company in the state. I had served food to presidents, to rock stars, to queens. Both real and self-proclaimed. I knew quality. And the quality of this apartment, from the Italian leather chairs to the Sub-Zero refrigerator, was impeccable. It was also, I knew with the quiet certain ache of a mother who sees too much completely and utterly beyond their means. My son, Michael, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the panoramic view of the Charlotte skyline. At 35 he was a handsome man, with his father's kind eyes and a dreamer's spirit. He was a talented architect, a true artist with lines and space, but his talent had not yet translated into the kind of lucrative success that could pay for a view like this. His firm was still new, still struggling to land the big headline-grabbing projects that would make his name. And yet here they were, living in a gilded cage floating high above the city, seemingly without a financial care in the world. I was the reason, a secret silent partner in this beautiful precarious lie. I looked at the sleek minimalist kitchen, and I remembered the chaos of my own kitchens, the scent of yeast and roasting garlic, the clatter of pots and pans, the honest, beautiful mess of a life spent working, creating, earning. Jessica's kitchen had the pristine, untouched quality of a museum exhibit. I doubted anything more complicated than champagne had ever been chilled in that refrigerator. Michael is just so brilliant, Jessica continued, her hand resting lightly on my son's arm. He's about to land the commission for the new Lakeside Pavilion. It's going to be his masterpiece. Michael smiled, a little too quickly. It's not a sure thing yet, Jess. Don't be modest, darling, she cooed. They'd be fools not to choose you. I watched them, my two beautiful, ambitious children, and I felt a familiar quiet unease. I had sold my business 2 years ago for a fortune I could never have imagined as a young woman, starting out with nothing but a set of my grandmother's recipes and a fire in my belly. I had done it to retire, to enjoy my life, but mostly to help them, to give them a foundation, a head start. I never had. But as I sat in their silent, perfect, and deeply dishonest apartment, I had the gnawing, persistent feeling that I hadn't given them a foundation. I had given them a trap. The secret had been born 2 years ago over a similar cup of tea in a similarly sterile environment. Michael and Jessica had just gotten married, and they were looking for their first home. I had expected them to choose a nice starter house in a neighborhood like Dilworth. Something charming and manageable, a place where they could build a life and some equity. Jessica, however, had other ideas. She had her heart set on the Ascent, the newest and most luxurious high-rise in Uptown. It was a building for titans of banking and tech CEOs. It was not a place for a young, struggling architect. I remember the day she had invited me to lunch. Without Michael, it was at a quiet, expensive bistro. The kind of place where the waiters murmur and the butter is served in the shape of a swan. She had been the picture of charm and daughter-in-lawly devotion. Brenda. She had begun, her voice a low, confidential purr. I know you're worried about Michael, about the pressure he's under to succeed. And this apartment, I know it seems like a lot. But you have to understand, in our world, In the world we want to be in, image is everything. She had explained her theory with a cold, clear, and deeply cynical logic. To get the big architectural commissions, Michael needed to be seen as a peer by the wealthy clients he was courting. He needed to live in their world, to move in their circles. To live in a modest house in the suburbs would be to brand himself as a small-time provincial architect. "This apartment isn't an expense, Brenda," she had said, her eyes shining with a convincing, passionate sincerity. "It's an investment in his future, in our future. It's the stage upon which he can perform his success, until that success becomes a reality. It's a $6,000 a month stage, Jessica," I had replied, my voice dry. "I know," she'd said, and then she had leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And we can't afford it, not yet." And then she had made her pitch. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. She didn't ask for a handout. She asked for a secret investment. "You're the most successful business person I know, Brenda," she had said, her flattery as smooth as the butter on the table. "I want you to be our silent partner. Just for a little while. Just until Michael's firm takes off. Could you help us with the rent? We wouldn't tell Michael. It would crush his pride. He's such a proud man. We can tell him my parents are helping us with a small investment from my trust fund." The lie was twofold and brilliant. It played on my love for my son, my desire to see him succeed, and it played on my desire to protect his pride, his sense of himself as a provider. To him, the help would be coming from her family, from the old money Suttons, a source he would find acceptable, even prestigious. My own, self-made new money contribution would be hidden, a silent, invisible engine powering their glamorous life. I had hesitated. Every instinct I had, honed by 30 years of negotiating with tough, unsentimental suppliers and clients, screamed at me that this was a bad deal. But then I looked at her earnest, pleading face, and I thought of my son, and I thought of the fierce, all-consuming love I had for him, and the mother in me made a decision that the CEO in me never would have. "All right, Jessica," I had said with a sigh, "temporarily. Just until he lands his first big project." That had been 2 years ago. 2 years of a temporary arrangement that had become a permanent, unspoken reality. Every month, on the 1st, my wealth manager's office executed an automatic, electronic transfer of $6,000 directly to the leasing company of their building. It was a clean, silent, and deeply invisible transaction. A secret lifeline that I had provided, a lie that I had agreed to co-sign. And for 2 years my son had been living a life of blissful, ignorant, and deeply subsidized success, all while his clever, ambitious wife praised her own savvy budgeting and the generosity of her own family. The foundation of Jessica's entire worldview, the bedrock upon which she had built her identity, was her mother. Margaret Sutton was not just a person to Jessica. She was a concept, an ideal, a walking, breathing testament to a life of effortless inherited grace, and she was a stick with which Jessica used to beat me, subtly and not so subtly, at every opportunity. "Mother had the most wonderful garden party last week," she would say, her voice a casual, airy thing, as she looked out at the bustling, energetic chaos of the Charlotte skyline from their apartment window. Everything was perfect, of course. The peonies were just so. She didn't have to lift a finger. She just presides. It's a gift she has. The implication was clear. I, Brenda Hayes, had built my entire career on lifting fingers. I had lifted heavy stock pots. I had kneaded mountains of dough. I had stood on my feet for 18 hours a day during wedding season. My success was the product of sweat and labor. A thing that was, in Jessica's world, slightly distasteful. Real elegance, she believed, was a state of being, not a result of doing. Margaret Sutton was the queen bee of Charlotte's old guard society. The kind of woman whose name was a permanent fixture on the boards of the Mint Museum and the Charlotte Symphony. Her family, the Devereux, had made their fortune in textiles generations ago. That fortune, I knew from the quiet, interconnected gossip of the city's elite, had dwindled significantly over the years. But the family name still carried the immense, unshakable weight of old money. They were a dynasty in decline, but they had perfected the art of projecting an image of effortless, unbothered wealth. To Jessica, this was the pinnacle of human achievement. She saw her mother's life not as a slow, graceful slide into irrelevance, but as a masterpiece of social artistry. I was talking to Mother about the catering for the real estate gala. She'd say, a pointed look in my direction. She gave me the most brilliant advice. She said, "Darling, the secret to a perfect event is to be the calmest person in the room. You hire the best, and then you let them do their work. A hostess should never ever be seen to be managing. This, of course, was a direct shot at my own, very hands-on and very successful career. I had been famous for my meticulous management, for being on site at every event, a general commanding her troops, ensuring every single detail was perfect. In Jessica's eyes, this was not a sign of professionalism. It was a sign of being a common tradeswoman. Michael, to my constant quiet heartbreak, had bought into this narrative completely. He adored his mother-in-law. He saw her as the epitome of class and sophistication. He loved the stories she told of a bygone, more elegant Charlotte. He was a man with an artist's soul, and he was captivated by the romance of her family's history. "You have to admit, Mom, Margaret has a certain grace," he'd said to me once after a stilted family brunch at the Suttons' ancestral home, a beautiful but slightly crumbling mansion in the Myers Park neighborhood. "It's a different way of being, effortless." I had wanted to say, "It's easy to be effortless when you've never had to put in any effort, Michael." I had wanted to explain to him that the Suttons' grace was funded by the slow, steady liquidation of assets that dead men had earned a century ago. I had wanted to tell him that my own life, a life of hard work and tangible creation, was a thing of far greater substance. But I hadn't. To do so would be to sound bitter, jealous. It would be to criticize the woman his wife worshipped, and by extension his wife herself. And so I had just smiled, a quiet, tight-lipped smile, and said, "Yes, dear. She's a very elegant woman." The idealization of Margaret Sutton was the central myth of their marriage. She was the standard against which all other women, especially me, were judged. And I, with my practical calloused hands and my self-made fortune, was always found wanting. The tension in our relationship had become a constant, low-grade hum, an electrical current of unspoken resentments that made every interaction feel fraught and delicate. Jessica's subtle, constant comparisons of me to her mother had become more pointed, more frequent. My own patience, which I had always considered to be one of my greatest strengths, was wearing dangerously thin. I could feel my son Michael being pulled in two directions, and the strain was showing on him. He loved me. I knew he did, but he was also deeply in love with his wife, and he was a man who hated conflict. He was trying, with a kind of desperate, clumsy diplomacy, to keep the peace between the two most important women in his life. I knew something had to give. I couldn't go on like this, sitting in their apartment like a poor relation, my every word and action being silently judged against the impossible, imaginary standard of Margaret Sutton's effortless grace. I had to do something to bridge the gap, to try and forge a real connection with my daughter-in-law, for Michael's sake if not for my own. So I decided to extend an olive branch. A very expensive, very carefully chosen olive branch. I called them on a Tuesday afternoon. Michael answered. His voice, as always, a little too busy, a little too stressed. "Hey Mom," he said, "what's up?" "I'm right in the middle of a schematic." "I won't keep you, honey," I said, my voice warm and cheerful. "I was just calling to invite you and Jessica to dinner on Saturday night." "My treat. I've made a reservation at the Fig Tree, 8 o'clock. There was a moment of surprised silence on his end of the line. The Fig Tree was not just any restaurant. It was one of the most exclusive and acclaimed dining experiences in Charlotte, a place of hushed reverent tones and a tasting menu that was booked out for months in advance. I still had connections. Of course, the owner was an old friend, a man whose own culinary career I had helped to launch years ago. "The Fig Tree," Michael said, his voice now a mixture of shock and a boyish, genuine excitement. "Wow, Mom, how did you get a reservation?" "I know a guy," I said with a small private smile. "So are you two free?" "Are we free?" he laughed. "For the Fig Tree we will cancel the plans of the gods themselves." "Yes, we are free. That's amazing, Mom. Thank you." I could hear him turn away from the phone and call to Jessica. "Jess, you're not going to believe this. My mom got us a table at the Fig Tree for Saturday." I heard her muffled, distant reply. A sound of what I was sure was impressed and slightly shocked surprise. He came back on the line, his voice full of a new, happy energy. "She's thrilled, Mom. We both are. This is really thoughtful. I just thought it would be nice for the three of us to have a proper evening out," I said, my heart lifting with a new, fragile hope, "to just talk and enjoy ourselves." "It's a perfect idea," he said, his voice warm with a genuine affection I hadn't heard in months. "We'll be there. And Mom, thanks. This means a lot." I hung up the phone, a small triumphant smile on my face. It was working. I had found a language she understood. The language of status, of exclusivity. A reservation at the fig tree was a power move. A subtle but clear demonstration that Brenda Hayes, the common caterer, still had a level of influence in this city that Jessica could only dream of. My hope for the evening was simple. I wanted us to sit down in a neutral, beautiful space and to just be a family. I wanted to talk to my son about his dreams, to listen to my daughter-in-law's stories, to find some small patch of common ground upon which we could begin to build a real relationship. I was extending an olive branch. I had no way of knowing that she would take that branch, strip it of its leaves, and use it to beat me over the head. The fig tree is housed in a beautifully restored 1913 craftsman-style bungalow in the Elizabeth neighborhood, a place of quiet, understated elegance. The dining rooms are small and intimate, with fireplaces, dark wood, and the soft glow of candlelight. It was the perfect stage for the evening I had planned, a place where the loud, abrasive posturing of the modern world was not welcome. I arrived early and was shown to our table, a secluded corner spot with a view of the quiet, tree-lined street. I ordered a glass of Sancerre and I waited, the familiar nervous anticipation of a hostess before a big event settling over me. They arrived a few minutes late. A whirlwind of youth and beauty. Michael looked handsome and relaxed, his usual worried frown replaced by a happy, expectant smile. Jessica was a vision in a sleek black cocktail dress, her diamonds glittering in the soft, flickering candlelight. She looked around the intimate, old-world dining room, and for the first time she seemed genuinely impressed. "This is lovely, Brenda," she said, her voice a soft, appreciative purr as she slid into the banquette. "Mother has been trying to get a reservation here for months." The small, competitive jab was not lost on me, but I chose to ignore it. Tonight was about peace. "I'm so glad you could make it," I said with a warm smile. The first 20 minutes of the dinner were a success. We talked about Michael's work. He had a potential new project, a design for a modern art gallery, and he spoke about it with a passion and an excitement I hadn't seen in him in years. I listened. I asked intelligent questions. I was the proud, supportive mother. Even Jessica seemed engaged, offering her own insights from her work in the gallery world. For a moment we were not antagonists. We were a family, working together, supporting each other. It was a beautiful and tragically fleeting illusion. The tension began to seep in with the second course. The conversation had turned to a recent charity event Jessica had attended, a lavish gala hosted by one of Charlotte's old, powerful banking families. "It was beautiful, of course," she said, taking a delicate bite of her seared scallop. "But the food was a disaster. The catering was just so uninspired. Cold canapes, a very dry salmon. It's amazing what people will pay for mediocrity these days." I felt a familiar hot prickle of annoyance. She knew my history. She knew I had built my entire life on a foundation of not being mediocre. The comment was a deliberate, if subtle, slight. "Good catering is an art," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "It's about more than just the food. It's about logistics, about timing. It's a science." She gave me a small, condescending smile. "I suppose," she said, her tone implying that it was a very common and slightly boring kind of science. "My mother, of course, has a different approach. She believes the secret to a perfect party is to remain completely detached from the mechanics of it. She says a hostess's only job is to be charming. The actual work, that's for the staff." The distinction was clear. There were two kinds of people in the world: the elegant, detached hostesses, and the common, working staff. And I, with my lifetime of experience in the latter, was being gently but firmly put in my place. I tried to steer the conversation back to neutral territory. I asked Michael about his car, the classic Mustang he was restoring, but Jessica was relentless. She seemed determined to establish the superiority of her own world, of her own mother's values. "Speaking of which," she said, turning to me, her eyes bright with a false friendly interest, "I'm helping a client plan a large fundraiser at her home. A seated dinner for 200. I was wondering if you had any practical advice on how to manage the flow of the kitchen, for instance." It was a trap, a beautifully constructed, passive-aggressive trap. She was asking for my professional advice, but her tone made it clear that she considered that advice to be from a lower, less refined world than her own. She was inviting me to be the caterer, not the matriarch, but it was an olive branch of a sort, a direct question, and I, in my foolish hopeful desire to find some common ground, decided to take it. This was my chance. This was the opening I had been waiting for. The moment to bridge the gap, to show her that my workmanlike past was not a source of shame, but a source of deep hard-won expertise. She had asked for my advice. I would give it to her, not as a condescending lecture, but as a shared secret between two women who, in our own ways, understood the art of creating a beautiful experience for others. Well, I began, a warm, genuine smile on my face for the first time that evening. A seated dinner for 200 is a beast. The biggest mistake people make is with the plating. The kitchen can get bottlenecked. The key is to set up 2 separate plating lines, one for proteins and one for starches, and have them converge at the pass. It cuts your time in half, and for a party that size, you should always have at least one dedicated staff member, whose only job is to manage the dirty dishes. It seems like a small thing, but a backed-up scullery can bring the entire operation to a screeching halt. I was in my element. I was talking about the logistics, the hidden architecture of a perfect event. I was sharing the kind of practical, invaluable wisdom that I had spent 30 years accumulating. I was giving her a genuine, useful piece of my professional soul. I looked at her expecting to see a flicker of appreciation, of respect, of a shared understanding. But that is not what I saw. I saw her smile, which had been one of polite, feigned interest, begin to tighten at the corners. I saw a flicker of something cold and dismissive in her eyes. I had not been giving her advice. I had been confirming her prejudice. I had been proving that I was, at my core, just a glorified kitchen manager, a woman who thought in terms of plating lines and dirty dishes. I was the help. She let me finish. She listened to my enthusiastic, detailed explanation with a kind of detached anthropological curiosity. And then, when I was done, she put down her fork. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine. She looked at me, and her expression was no longer one of passive aggression. It was one of pure, unadulterated and deeply condescending pity. "That's very practical, Brenda," she said, her voice a smooth, silken thing, each word a carefully polished stone designed to inflict maximum damage. "My mother, of course, has a different philosophy. She taught me that elegance is something you are, not something you do. It's about a certain innate grace, a quality that cannot be learned in a kitchen." She paused, letting the insult with its clear, brutal implication hang in the air between us. Michael looked from his wife to me, a look of dawning, horrified panic on his face. He could feel the temperature in the room dropping, the fragile peace of the evening about to shatter. And then, Jessica delivered the final fatal blow. She gave me a small, sad and utterly devastating smile, the kind one gives to a well-meaning but hopelessly simple-minded child. "You're not even half the woman my mother is." The words landed on the table with the force of a physical blow. A stunned, ringing silence descended upon our small, candlelit corner of the universe. The cheerful, ambient noise of the restaurant, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of other diners seemed to fade into a distant, irrelevant hum. The world had narrowed to this single, terrible moment. Michael was frozen, his face a mask of pure, horrified disbelief. He looked as if he had just been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth to say something, to object, to defend me, but no sound came out. He was a man caught in the crossfire between the two most powerful forces in his life, and he was completely, utterly paralyzed. I looked at Jessica. Her face was calm, her expression one of almost serene satisfaction. She had done it. She had finally said the quiet part out loud. She had drawn the line in the sand, and she had placed her mother on one side, the side of elegance and grace, and me on the other, the side of common, practical failure. She thought she had won. She thought she had put me in my place, once and for all. In that moment something inside me shifted. The part of me that had been striving, hoping, desperately trying to win her affection, the part that had been absorbing her subtle, constant slights, simply died. It was a quiet, painless death, and the woman who was left, the woman who looked back at her across the table, was not the patient, accommodating and slightly insecure mother-in-law. It was Brenda Hayes, CEO, the woman who had built an empire from scratch, who had stared down powerful men in boardrooms, who understood that in any negotiation there comes a moment when the time for politeness is over, and the time for a hostile takeover begins. I did not get angry. I did not cry. My rage was a cold, quiet, and deeply powerful thing. It was a clarifying force, burning away all the sentimental, maternal fog and leaving only the hard, brilliant clarity of a strategic objective. Slowly, deliberately, I placed my heavy linen napkin on the table beside my plate. I pushed my chair back from the table, the sound of the wood scraping against the floor, a loud jarring noise in the sudden profound silence. I looked at Jessica, and for the first time I did not see my son's wife. I saw a competitor, a badly over-leveraged, deeply arrogant competitor who had just made a fatal strategic miscalculation. My voice, when I finally spoke, was not loud. It was not angry. It was quiet, it was clear, and it was the most devastatingly powerful sound in the entire crowded restaurant. Then she can start paying your rent. The 6 words I spoke were not a shout. They were a quiet, precise, and perfectly aimed stiletto, and they found their mark in the heart of the table's tense silence. Jessica's calm, smug expression of superiority simply shattered. It was as if I had reached across the table and slapped her. Her mouth fell open. A small, unladylike O of pure, uncomprehending shock. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very, very small. The words made no sense to her. Not in the context of the conversation she thought she was having. She had been playing a game of social dominance. I had just without warning changed the game to one of raw financial reality. But it was my son's reaction that was the true, beautiful, and heartbreaking centerpiece of the moment. Michael, who had been frozen in a state of horrified paralysis, snapped his head towards me as if he'd been shot. His face was a mask of pure, absolute, and utter confusion. The argument between his wife and his mother, the familiar, uncomfortable tension he was used to navigating, had just taken a bizarre, incomprehensible left turn into a topic he knew nothing about. His eyes, wide and full of a dawning frantic panic, darted from my calm, unreadable face to Jessica's suddenly terrified one, and then back again. He was a man who had been walking on what he thought was solid ground, and had just discovered he was standing on a trap door, and it had just sprung open. "Rent?" he asked, and his voice was a raw, cracking, and deeply bewildered thing. The single word was a question mark, so large it seemed to fill the entire silent restaurant. He wasn't just asking a question, he was pleading for an explanation that could make sense of the sudden terrifying shift in his reality. He looked at me, his eyes now full of a desperate, childlike confusion, and he asked the question again, the one that would forever change his life, his marriage, and his understanding of the 2 women sitting before him. "What rent, Mom?" His voice was a little too loud, a little too sharp. A few diners at the nearby tables turned to look, their expressions ones of polite, discreet curiosity. The quiet, elegant dinner party had just become a public spectacle. I did not answer him, I did not need to. The answer was not mine to give. I simply held my son's gaze for a long, pregnant moment. And then slowly, deliberately, I shifted my eyes to Jessica. I said nothing, I just looked at her. The look was a silent, powerful, and utterly non-negotiable command. "Your move, dear," it said. "Your lie, your problem, you fix it." And in that moment, under the full crushing weight of my calm, expectant gaze, and her husband's frantic, desperate one, Jessica Hayes, the poised, elegant, and effortlessly superior queen of her own imagined universe, began to crumble, and it was a beautiful, terrible, and deeply satisfying thing to watch. The dinner did not so much end as it imploded. I calmly, quietly, placed a $100 bill on the table to cover my wine and my uneaten entree. A final silent gesture of severance. "You 2 can take care of the rest," I said, my voice a cool, even thing. Then I stood up, gave them both a small, polite, and utterly meaningless nod, and I walked out of the restaurant. I did not look back. The drive home for them, I imagined, was a masterpiece of domestic horror. Michael, a man whose entire reality had just been upended, was in a state of pure adrenaline-fueled shock. The gentle, slightly distracted dreamer was gone, replaced by a man demanding for the first time in his life a hard, non-negotiable truth. What did she mean, Jessica? He would have demanded the moment the valet closed the car door, sealing them in the claustrophobic leather and glass box of their car. "What rent? Answer me, now." And Jessica, cornered, panicked, and completely out of her depth, would have launched into the frantic, desperate, and ultimately doomed performance of a lifetime. The lies, I could picture them now, would have come out in a frantic, tumbling rush, each one more transparent and more pathetic than the last. First, the denial. "I don't know what she's talking about. She's old, Michael. She gets confused. She's just trying to cause trouble between us, to make me look bad because she's jealous." A weak, desperate opening salvo. He would not have bought it. He had seen the look on my face. It was not the look of confusion. It was the look of a queen who had just dropped a guillotine. Next, the partial admission wrapped in a victim's cloak. "Okay, fine. She helped us out once. A long time ago, with the security deposit. It was a gift. And now, she's throwing it back in my face, twisting it into something ugly because she's angry that I stood up to her. Better but still not good enough. My words had been too specific. Then she can start paying your rent. Not paid. Paying. Present tense. Continuous. Finally, cornered by his relentless, desperate questioning, she would have arrived at the final, tearful, and deeply manipulative half-truth. It was a loan, she would have sobbed. The tears for once, probably genuine tears of pure animal panic. A private loan between me and your mother. I was going to pay her back. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. I was trying to protect you, Michael. Because I love you. It was a good performance. A classic. It combined a kernel of truth with a heavy dose of emotional manipulation, casting her as the protective, loving wife, and me as the cruel, vengeful creditor. But it would not have worked. Not this time. Because my son, for all his willful blindness, was not a fool, and he was an architect. He understood that foundations were everything, and the foundation of his entire beautiful, successful adult life, the stunning uptown apartment, the effortless lifestyle, the very image of himself that he presented to the world, had just been revealed to be a lie, and he could not, rest until he understood the full, terrible, and deeply humiliating truth of its construction. The hysterical drive home was just the beginning of Jessica's long, slow, and very public demolition. The next morning I woke up with a sense of calm, quiet purpose I hadn't felt in years. The grief of the previous night's confrontation was still there, a dull, heavy ache in the center of my chest. The image of my son's shocked, betrayed face was a wound that I knew would take a long time to heal. But beneath the grief there was something else. A hard, clear, and deeply satisfying sense of resolve. I had made a promise. A quiet, simple, and legally binding promise. In that restaurant. Then she can start paying your rent. It was not an emotional outburst. It was a statement of new company policy, and I, Brenda Hayes, had built my entire career on the simple, unshakable principle of always following through. I did not call Michael. I did not call Jessica. I did not engage in the messy emotional drama that I knew was currently exploding in their uptown apartment. My actions now would be as clean, as quiet, and as impersonal as the automatic transfer that had been the source of all this trouble in the first place. At precisely 9 a.m. I sat down at the antique secretary desk in my sunny, quiet living room. I took out my phone and I made a single call. Not to my son, not to his wife, but to a man named Mr. Abernathy, my longtime wealth manager, a quiet, brilliant man who had helped me turn the profits from my catering business into a formidable self-sustaining fortune. He answered on the first ring, his voice the calm, reassuring sound of old, well-managed money. "Brenda," he said, "good morning. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Good morning, Charles," I replied, my voice cool, calm, and all business. "I need you to execute a simple instruction for me this morning. It concerns a recurring automatic payment." "Of course," he said, and I could hear the soft rhythmic clicking of his keyboard in the background as he pulled up my accounts. "Which one are we looking at?" "There is a monthly transfer of $6,000, I said, my voice flat, made on the first of every month from my primary investment account directly to a holding company called Queen City Lofts Management. Yes," he said, "the payment for the apartment in the Ascent. I see it right here. It's been running like clockwork for, let me see, for exactly 24 months now. What do you need to do? Adjust the amount?" "No, Charles," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I need you to cancel it." There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end of the line. Charles Abernathy was more than just my banker. He was a discreet and trusted confidant. He had known my late husband. He had watched Michael grow up. He knew without my having to say a word that this was not just a financial transaction. This was a family earthquake. "Cancel it?" he repeated, his voice now laced with a careful professional concern. "Not postpone. A full permanent cancellation." "That is correct," I confirmed. "Cancel the automatic transfer. Effective immediately. I want to be sure that the next scheduled payment, on the 1st of next month, does not go through. Can you confirm that for me?" More clicking. A long, thoughtful pause. "Yes, Brenda," he finally said, his voice now a low, serious thing. "I can confirm, the transfer has been terminated. It's done." "Thank you, Charles," I said. "That's all I needed." "Brenda," he said, just before I was about to hang up. Is everything all right?" I looked out the window of my study, at the beautiful old magnolia tree in my front yard, its leaves a deep glossy green, its roots strong and secure in the earth. Everything, I said, a slow, sad smile touching my lips, is finally about to be. Have a good day, Charles. I hung up the phone. It was done. The secret, silent and deeply toxic lifeline had been cut. The Bank of Mom was now officially and permanently closed for business. The email arrived in Michael's inbox on a Monday morning, a week after the disastrous dinner. It was a sterile, automated message from the management company of his apartment building. Subject: urgent. Payment failure for account 17. The body of the message was brief, impersonal, and utterly devastating. It informed him that the automatic payment for his October rent had been declined due to insufficient funds from the originating account. It politely requested that he rectify the situation within 5 business days to avoid late fees and potential eviction proceedings. Michael stared at the email on his phone, the blood draining from his face. For a week he had been living in a state of suspended, agonizing disbelief. A week of tense circular arguments with Jessica. A week of his calls to me going straight to a new, coldly polite voicemail message. He had allowed himself to believe that this was all just a terrible argument, that my words in the restaurant had been an angry, emotional outburst, not a statement of policy. He had believed that on the 1st of the month, the magic, invisible hand that had always supported his life would simply continue its work. This email was the hard, digital, and irrefutable proof that he had been wrong. The safety net was gone. He confronted Jessica not with anger but with the dead, hollow calm of a man who has no fight left in him. He simply walked into their beautiful sunlit living room, held out his phone and said, "Explain this." And Jessica, faced with the undeniable black and white evidence of her lie, finally, completely and utterly broke. The confession was not a single clean admission. It was a long, ugly, and deeply selfish story, punctuated by tears of self-pity and frantic, desperate attempts at justification. She told him everything. The lunch with me 2 years ago. The carefully constructed lie about her parents' investment. The way she had manipulated my love for him, my desire to protect his pride, to secure the lifestyle she so desperately craved. "I was trying to protect you, Michael." She wept, her face a mess of mascara and shame. "I knew you were stressed about the firm. I didn't want you to have to worry about the rent. I thought by the time your business took off we could just take it over ourselves and she would never have to know." "Protect me?" he repeated, his voice a dead, hollow whisper. "You weren't protecting me, Jessica. You were lying to me, every single day, for 2 years. You let me live in this fantasy, this beautiful, expensive lie, while my mother was paying for it. My mother." He looked around the stunning, designer-furnished apartment, at the floor-to-ceiling windows, at the original art on the walls, at the entire fraudulent stage set of his successful life. And he saw it, for the first time, for what it was, a cage, a beautiful gilded cage, built by his wife's ambition and paid for by his mother's love. "You let me believe your parents were funding this," he said, his voice a mixture of awe and a new, dawning horror. "You let me feel indebted to them, grateful, while my own mother—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The full, staggering weight of his own willful blindness, of his own complicity in the disrespect he had shown me, came crashing down on him. He remembered every single time Jessica had made a casual, cutting remark about my practical nature. He remembered every single time he had stayed silent, or worse, had agreed with her. He had been a fool, a blind, ungrateful, and deeply foolish man. The ugly confession finally ended. Jessica was left weeping on the white sofa, a beautiful, broken woman in the ruins of her own creation. Michael just stood by the window, staring out at the city, at the world he thought he had conquered. He felt no anger towards her anymore. No rage, just a profound, empty, and deeply sorrowful sense of pity, for her, for himself, and most of all for his mother. In the wreckage of his marriage and his life, Michael's mind, desperate for a solution, a lifeline, clung to the one remaining piece of the myth he had been sold. Margaret Sutton. The idealized matriarch, the woman of effortless grace and, he still believed, of immense old money wealth. Jessica's lie had been built on the premise of her family's financial support. So in Michael's panicked, shattered mind, the logical solution was to go to the source. Margaret would fix this. She would be horrified to learn of this misunderstanding, and she would, of course, step in and make it right. She would cover the rent, smooth things over with me, and restore order to their chaotic world. He made the call that afternoon, his hands trembling as he dialed the familiar number of the Suttons' grand, slightly crumbling Myers Park mansion. "Margaret," he began. The moment she answered, his voice a frantic, desperate rush. It's Michael. There's been a terrible misunderstanding with my mother about the apartment. She's very upset. We need your help. There was a moment of surprised and distinctly flustered silence on the other end of the line. Michael dear, Margaret's smooth cultured voice finally said, what on earth are you talking about? He stumbled through the story, the ugly, humiliating truth of their financial dependency, of my 2 years of secret rent payments. He explained that I had, as he put it, cut them off, and that they were in a desperate situation. He was waiting for the gasp of shock, the cry of maternal concern, the immediate, powerful assurance that she would handle everything. Instead, the silence on the other end of the line was long, and deeply, deeply uncomfortable. The rent? Margaret finally said, her voice a strange, high-pitched and distinctly panicked thing. For the apartment at the Ascent. Michael, what are you implying? I'm not implying anything, he said, his own frustration and panic rising. Jessica told me you were the ones helping us with it. From her trust fund. We just need you to cover it, until I can sort this out with my mom. He heard her let out a sound that was half laugh, half gasp of pure hysterical horror. A trust fund? She said, her voice now a thin, brittle squeak that was utterly devoid of its usual, effortless grace. Good heavens, child, what trust fund? The only trust fund my daughter has is the one in her own imagination. And then, the final devastating truth came tumbling out. Margaret Sutton, the queen bee of Charlotte society, the woman whose life was a testament to inherited wealth, was forced to make a humiliating confession of her own. Michael, she said, her voice dropping to a low, embarrassed whisper, you have to understand, my family, the Suttons, we are not what we once were. The textile money, it's been gone for a very long time. We have the house, of course. We have the name, but the liquid assets, they are modest. We are living on the fumes of our reputation, my dear. The idol had just revealed that her feet and indeed her entire body were made of the cheapest, most brittle clay. $6,000 a month? She continued, her voice now a frantic, almost tearful thing. My dear boy, if I had that kind of money, I would be fixing my own leaky roof, not paying for your view of the skyline. I'm so sorry. I had no idea Jessica had told you such a thing. That was very foolish of her. Michael just stood there in his silent, beautiful and unpaid-for apartment, the phone pressed to his ear, listening to the sound of the last, supporting pillar of his entire world crumbling to dust. His wife was a liar. His mother-in-law was broke. In his own mother, the one person in his life who had been a rock of genuine, solid and dependable strength, was the one he had allowed his wife to disrespect, to mock, to dismiss as a common caterer. The full catastrophic scope of his own foolishness was now laid bare. He had been chasing a ghost, he had been worshipping a facade, and he had, in the process, betrayed the only real thing in his life. He hung up the phone, the last of his hope, his denial, his illusions, gone forever. The week that followed the phone call with Margaret Sutton was a descent into a new, more terrifying level of reality. The abstract emotional crisis of their shattered relationships had now become a concrete, logistical, and deeply humiliating financial one. The life they had known was not just over, it was being actively dismantled, piece by methodical piece. They were trapped in the beautiful apartment which now felt like a prison. Every designer chair, every piece of expensive art was a monument to their own foolishness. They moved around each other like ghosts, the silence between them thick with blame and a shared, unspeakable terror. The calls started. First from the leasing company, polite but firm, inquiring about the missed rent payment. Then from the credit card companies, their automated systems noting the sudden shocking lack of a monthly payment on their massive 5-figure balances. They tried to sell things. Jessica, in a fit of panic desperation, took a diamond necklace, a birthday gift from Michael paid for with my money, to a high-end jeweler in South Park. The offer she received, a fraction of its retail value, was a brutal lesson in the difference between the price of luxury and its actual worth. It was not enough to even make a dent in their mountain of debt. The final public humiliation arrived on a crisp, sunny autumn afternoon, exactly 1 week after Michael had received the first email. A uniformed process server knocked on their door. He handed a shell-shocked Jessica a thick, legal-looking envelope. It was a formal 5-day notice of eviction for non-payment of rent. The document, with its cold legal jargon and its official courthouse stamp, was a thing of stark, brutal finality. Their private crisis was no longer private. This was a public record, a legal declaration of their failure. The news would be all over their gossipy high society world within hours. The shame of it was a physical thing, a hot, burning fire in their cheeks. That night, the fragile, resentful truce between them finally shattered. The fear, which had been a low, constant hum, erupted into a full-blown, ugly and deeply personal war. "This is your fault," Michael roared, the eviction notice crumpled in his fist. "Your obsession with this lifestyle, with keeping up with your broke mother's imaginary standards. You lied to me for 2 years, Jessica. You turned me into a fool." "My fault," she screamed back, her face a twisted mask of rage and self-pity. "I was trying to build a life for us, a life you were more than happy to enjoy when the champagne was flowing. You're the one who was too weak, too blind to see what was really going on. You were the one who let me treat your mother like dirt because you were too scared to stand up to me." The accusation, the one ugly truth in a sea of lies, hit him with the force of a physical blow. She was right. He had been weak. He had been a coward. He had stood by silently, while the woman he loved had mocked and belittled the woman who had given him everything. The fight raged for hours, a toxic, poisonous explosion of every unspoken resentment, every hidden insecurity from their entire relationship. By the time it was over, there was nothing left but the smoking, bitter wreckage of their marriage. They were left with nothing. No money, no credit, no home, and no one to blame but themselves. The gilded cage had been beautiful, but the fall from it was a long, hard, and deeply unforgiving one. 2 days after the eviction notice arrived, my doorbell rang. It was a little after 9 in the morning. I was in my kitchen, kneading dough for a loaf of sourdough bread, my hands covered in flour. The simple, physical act of making something real, something honest, had become a form of therapy for me in the past few weeks. I looked through the peephole. It was Michael. He was alone. He looked terrible. He was dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a wrinkled t-shirt, a far cry from his usual perfectly tailored suits. His face was pale and unshaven, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow with a grief and an exhaustion that was clearly bone deep. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. He looked like a man who had finally truly hit rock bottom. My first instinct, the old maternal instinct, was to open the door and pull him into my arms, to soothe his pain, to make it all better, but the new, wiser and more cautious Brenda held me back. I had to see what he would do. I had to hear what he had to say. This could not be another transaction. It had to be a real reckoning. I opened the door. He stood on my welcome mat, his hands shoved in his pockets, his gaze fixed on his own worn sneakers. He looked like a lost little boy. "Mom," he said, his voice a low, raspy thing. He finally, slowly, lifted his eyes to meet mine, and in them I saw no excuses, no justifications, just a profound and deeply humbling shame. Can I come in?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just stepped aside and held the door open. He walked past me into the foyer of the house he had grown up in, a house that must have now seemed like a palace of stability and truth compared to the world of lies he had been living in. He didn't walk into the living room. He just stood there in the middle of the foyer, looking around at the familiar walls, the family photographs as if seeing them for the first time. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he began, his voice cracking, the words a raw, painful admission. There are no excuses for what I did, for what I let happen. I was so caught up in the life that Jessica wanted, in the man I thought I was supposed to be, that I became blind." He looked at me, his eyes now swimming with tears of genuine, unadulterated remorse. "I was a coward," he said, the words a clean, simple and honest confession. "I knew what she was doing was wrong. I knew the way she spoke to you, the way she dismissed you. I knew it was cruel, and I said nothing, because I was weak, because I was afraid of losing her, of losing the life that I thought was so important." He took a shaky breath. "And the rent? Mom, I had no idea. I swear to you I believed her lies. But that's not an excuse. It's an indictment of my own foolishness. I should have known. I should have seen that the life we were living was impossible. But I didn't want to see. It was easier to just believe." He finally broke. A low, racking sob escaped his throat, and he covered his face with his hands. "You gave me everything," he wept. "My whole life. You worked so hard. You sacrificed so much to give me a foundation. And I took that foundation, and I let my wife build a beautiful, hollow and deeply rotten house on top of it. And I never, not once, stopped to thank the architect. I am so sorry." I stood there, my hands still white with the flour of my morning's baking, And I listened, and for the first time in a very long time, I heard the voice of my son, not the ambitious architect, not the frustrated husband, but the good, kind, and deeply lost boy I had raised. The apology was not a strategy, it was a surrender, and it was the first, necessary step in the long, difficult process of building something new. I listened to my son's raw, heartfelt apology, and I felt the hard, icy wall of my anger begin to melt. Not completely. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too profound for a simple, tearful absolution. But a thaw had begun. I saw in his eyes not the man who had sat silently while his wife insulted me, but the broken, humbled man who was finally painfully taking responsibility for his own weakness. I walked over to him and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I placed a hand on his arm. "Come on, Michael," I said, my voice soft but firm. "Let's sit down, we have a lot to talk about." I led him into the kitchen, the warm, beating heart of my home. I sat him down at the old, scarred wooden table where he had done his homework as a child, where we had shared 1,000 meals. I poured him a cup of coffee. He drank it like a man who had been wandering in the desert. "Jessica has left me," he said, his voice a dead, hollow thing. The moment the eviction notice went up, the moment she realized Margaret couldn't save us, she was gone. She packed her bags and went back to her parents' house. It was like a business deal that had gone bad. She was just cutting her losses. I just nodded, my expression giving nothing away. I felt no triumph in her departure, only a quiet, sad confirmation of what I had known all along. Their marriage had been a merger, and it had just been dissolved due to a catastrophic failure in financing. "I have nothing, Mom," he said, staring into his coffee cup. "The apartment is gone. The furniture is being repossessed. I have $3,000 in my checking account and a mountain of debt. I don't know what to do." He looked up at me, his eyes full of a new, terrifying vulnerability. He was not asking for a handout. He was a man who had lost his map, his compass, his very sense of direction, and he was asking for the first time for a true and honest guide. And so, I laid out the new terms. The new contract. "The Bank of Mom is closed. Michael," I began, my voice calm, clear, and utterly non-negotiable. "There will be no more secret rent payments. There will be no more blank checks to fund a lifestyle you have not earned. That chapter of our lives is over. Permanently." He nodded, a look of grim, resigned acceptance on his face. "I know," he whispered. "I understand. But," I continued, my voice softening slightly, "that does not mean I will not help you. I will not give you a fish. But I will, if you are willing to learn, teach you how to fish again." I laid out my proposal. It was not a bailout. It was a business plan. First, I said, you will find a new apartment. A small one-bedroom place in a neighborhood you can actually afford. I will co-sign the lease to get you started, but you, and you alone, will be responsible for the rent every single month. Second, I continued, you and I are going to go to a financial counselor. Together, you are going to lay out every single one of your debts, every one of your bad investments. We are going to create a budget. A real one, and you are going to stick to it. And third, I said, leaning forward, my eyes locking with his, and this is the most important part. You are a talented architect, Michael. I have never for a single moment doubted that. It's time you started acting like one. You will secure a real paying solo project within the next 6 months. Not a pie-in-the-sky dream, but a real-world contract that pays real-world money. You will use the connections you have. You will hustle. You will do whatever it takes. Your talent is your only true asset right now. It is time for you to leverage it. He listened to my terms, his expression a mixture of terror and a new dawning sense of hope. I was not offering him a golden parachute. I was offering him a blueprint for a new life. A life built not on illusions but on the hard, solid ground of reality. "I will do it," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Anything you say, Mom. I'll do it." "I know you will," I said. The old unconditional financial support was gone, but in its place was a new kind of support. A tougher, wiser, and ultimately more loving one. The consulting firm of Mom was now open for business. And our first project was to rebuild my son. The 6 months that followed were the hardest, and the most real, of my son's life. He moved into a small, clean, and deeply unglamorous one-bedroom apartment in the Plaza Midwood neighborhood. There was no doorman, no rooftop pool, no panoramic view of the skyline. There was just a small kitchen, a bedroom, and a living room that he quickly filled with his drafting table and his architectural models. For the first time since he had left my home, his living space was defined not by his wife's aspirations, but by his own work. The financial counseling sessions were a brutal, humbling experience for him. He was forced to confront the full, ugly scope of the debt he and Jessica had accumulated. He laid it all out on the table, every foolish investment, every extravagant purchase, and together with the calm, no-nonsense guidance of the counselor, we created a plan, a strict, unforgiving budget that left no room for luxuries, only for necessities and the slow, steady repayment of his debts. He struggled. There were times he called me, his voice full of a weary despair, tempted to give up, but he didn't. He ate at home. He sold his expensive car and bought a sensible second-hand sedan. He worked and he hustled. He took on small, thankless freelance jobs, designing a kitchen renovation here, a back porch there. He used the portfolio he had built to knock on the doors of every developer in the city. He faced 100 rejections, but he kept going. He was driven by a new, unfamiliar fuel, not the desire for a flashy lifestyle, but the simple, profound need to prove himself to his clients, to the world, and most of all to me. The call came 5 months into his new life. He called me, his voice buzzing with an excitement I hadn't heard since he was a little boy who had just built his first perfect Lego castle. "I got it, Mom," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I got the commission, the new community arts center in Noda. It's not the biggest project in the world, but it's real, and it's mine." I could hear the pride in his voice, the deep, resonant pride of a man who has finally, through his own talent and his own relentless effort, built something real. The final scene took place 2 months after that call. It was a Saturday. He and I were in his small, cluttered apartment. We were not there for a tense, performative family meal. We were there to work. He had spread the blueprints for the arts center out on his drafting table, and he was walking me through the design, his eyes shining with a passionate, creative fire. The design was brilliant. It was innovative, it was beautiful, and it was deeply connected to the community it was meant to serve. It was the work of an architect who had finally found his voice. Jessica, I had heard, had quietly finalized their divorce and had moved back in with her parents, a fallen princess in a crumbling castle. We did not speak of her. She was a ghost from a life that no longer existed. As I was getting ready to leave, Michael walked me to the door. "You know," he said, his voice quiet and full of a new adult gratitude, "that apartment in the Ascent, it never felt like home. It felt like a stage." This he said, gesturing to the small, cluttered and deeply authentic space around him. "This feels like home." I looked at my son. The weak, blind and foolish man who had allowed his wife to disrespect me was gone. In his place was a man who was humbled, who was hard-working, and who was, for the first time truly and completely, my son again. Our relationship was not the same as it had been. It was better. It was no longer built on a foundation of secrets and financial dependency. It was being rebuilt slowly, carefully, and beautifully on a new foundation. A foundation of honesty, of humility, and of a hard-won mutual respect. My investment, it turned out, was finally paying off.